As you can see, we're going to try and have a debate. We haven't done one before in an assembly, in a conference format. So what's important here is to realise, of course, that no one wants a debate where there's a pro cooperatives and then a negative view of cooperatives. We want two pros, is that right? That's right. But what we need in that context when we're going to have a debate is, of course, one pro or positive group and one that might be, let's call them a little contrary. Now, let's take contrary. If you've read the dictionary, which I did have to have a quick peek at, contrary really does mean opposite. But, you know, merry, quite contrary, that doesn't quite mean opposite, does it? It means a little bit, sort of slightly different. So we've got two wonderful groups of speakers, and I'm just going to introduce them to you shortly, who are going to talk about the big question. And the big question is based on the International Year of Cooperatives. It says, cooperatives build a better world? In this context of the Assembly, we've got to ask the questions, can cooperatives build a better Australia today? So in that sense, what we're looking to do is to inform, to challenge, and to maybe entertain. And so in that sense, let's look at how does the debate go. And this is going to be a little bit different to maybe what you remember it from school, or if you were the debating type, you went on with it further. But so what we've got is two teams. We've got a pro and a contrary team, and they will speak in sequence. In other words, we've got a pro team and a con team. And let me quickly introduce. In the pros, Greg Patmore, who's the Emeritus Professor in the University of Sydney's Business School. Nasteha, Mohamud, who is the chair of the United Housing Cooperative in Melbourne, and Mick Veitch. Many will know Mick from his years as an MLC here in New South Wales, but now a consultant working with Council House. But in the contrary team, Rebel Black. Rebel is the chair of the Rural Women's Cooperative. Dr. Garry Cronan, who's a cooperative researcher, recent PhD with the University of Sydney. You will notice that Gary's name tag is incorrectly spelt. I just want you to know that it's double R for those when you see him out there in the field. And Anthony Esposito, who is the Managing Director for the Union Cooperative Society in Brisbane. So we've got an amazing group. So what's going to happen? 6 minutes. Each person will speak, and that'll be an absolute correct 6 minutes. We'll give them a 5-minute warning. Hello.
We'll make sure it's heard.
So they'll talk for 6 minutes. So it'll go pro, con, pro, con, pro, con. At the conclusion of that, of course, in a good debate, there's always a chance for what was traditionally a rebuttal. Let's not call it a rebuttal, let's call it a reflection or a summary or an opportunity. And what will happen is we'll have 2 minutes from each of the speakers, again, but this time 6 minutes total from the groups, initially the pro, and then finally the con, offering the last scenarios. Of course, we need a winner. There's always a winner. Cooperatives are winners. We're winners. But there's only one way to tell there's going to be a winner, and that's you. So what we need is acclamation. So who's the ones we're going to talk to? Now, I've already introduced you quickly, but let's test that acclamation now. Let's look at the pro team. What do you think? I think the cons have got it already. Then the con team. All right, we're in for quite an entertaining next hour. So let's look forward to that. So first up, let's start the thing going at the moment that they get to the podium. But our first speaker which will start from the pro team, will be Greg Patmore from Sydney University.
Well, the question is, can cooperatives build a better Australia today? Well, we know. Let's go. Well, we're having a debate. But anyway, I did ask if I could do this in a form of mime or musical, but he said you did like the idea of musical, but you said I couldn't do mime. I don't know what he's got against mime, but anyway, I'm going to give you just a straight small.
Years of theatre.
Years of theatre. But to me, the question of today has three dimensions. It's the past, present and future. And there's no denying when you look at the incredible work that we've had done by a range of people on the history of the cooperative movement, what a proud history we have. It's nothing to be laughed at or joked at. We have influenced many aspects of Australian life. And in fact, we sometimes forget that cooperatives have been a centre of government policy, believe it or not. You mightn't think that, but you look at the development of agricultural cooperatives in Queensland, New South Wales, Tasmania specifically. Cooperative legislation was at the heart of government policy on agricultural development. If you look at housing finance, we forget about the incredible cooperative building society, cooperative housing society, which were cooperative building societies funded by government guarantee, where groups of 20 to 30 people got together to get a government guaranteed loan at a discounted rate to buy their houses. It was one of the most successful movements in terms of numbers in this country. And in the 1980s, some governments saw cooperatives as a solution for unemployment, particularly with the collapse of the post-war boom. And we saw an interest in worker cooperatives, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria. So we're just not a movement that sets up retail stores, that solves agricultural, solves market failures. We have been and could be and should be the centre of government policy in many different areas. And as I say, the history is something we should be proud of and we should draw upon and learn from and look at the way in which we can shape today and tomorrow. And it's an issue that remains with us today. The challenges, I was just talking to Sam before, the fishing cooperatives were saying to me that the problems that they were created for, like ensuring stable market, for example, are still much the same issues they're facing today. So even the issues in which cooperatives were established for, we still have to fight for to make sure we get the best outcome for our particular members, whoever they happen to be, consumers, workers, farmers. So these issues are still alive and they're still there. The other thing that's important is we face as communities continual challenges to our lives. Those are, for example, one of the big issues that we see in many communities is the shutting of banks, the shutting of post offices, and the way in which that is done. I lived in a suburb of Sydney. It's just not a rural problem, it's a metropolitan problem too, where we had a post office, we had banks, right? Last bank disappeared. It went last year. And we've just been told, we weren't told, the post office is about to be shut, right? You know how we all found about it? A development application for the site of the post office. Channel 7 News picked it up and suddenly, the issue has become a live issue. But nobody told us. I'm a post box holder and nobody told me, and we still haven't been told. We live in an age, quite frankly, of incredible state and private corporation arrogance in the way they treat communities. We have a different set of values, which includes community consultation, and the thing that sometimes, I know there was a discussion of social business, we are the social business. We are the believers in economic democracy. That is, we have a voice in the organisations that we're with and that we are part of. And that shouldn't be forgotten. Okay, all the other things and principles are important too, but the thing that drives me and my passion for this movement is the strong belief in economic democracy. That's the message we send today. When we've got people, for example, I won't mention any names, but they're at the inauguration of a certain president in Washington, who actually believe democracy has failed and corporations, large corporations, should rule the world. I won't mention any names, but you know who I'm talking about. So we are a champion of democracy. I know that might sound strange, but we are supplementing and reinforcing political democracy. And that's part of our role in building and maintaining a better Australia. Then there's the future. It's not just about now, where do we go?
1 minute.
I know. The trapdoor's about to hit. Aren't we appalled at the rise of the digital people who control Facebook and all those other areas? Aren't we appalled? And haven't we seen the consequences of that? Look who was sitting behind them at the inauguration of a certain president I won't mention. We have in Australia a lot of interesting examples of co-ops moving into the digital space. Beehive in Bendigo, the Douglas Shire Accommodation Cooperative in Queensland, the work being done on Tranbury Indigenous College on the cloud, particularly in preserving heritage, Indigenous heritage, which is an important part of our country. All I'm saying is, why don't we start thinking about recolonising that space, bringing together communities and community networks and having our own version of social media? Why is our government...
10 seconds.
Why is our government continually kowtowing to people in Washington? Why don't we have an Australian solution? And I think cooperatives could be an example of bringing networks together and setting up an Australian cooperative-based form of social democracy.
Comrades, it's great to be with you. Our next speaker will be Dr. Garry Cronan. His involvement in the cooperative sector, both nationally and internationally, spans over 40 years. I'm sure we'll hear about that. Importantly, he's been involved in some of the largest membership-based cooperative businesses, running cooperative development, involved in communications policy, including with the ICA, the International Cooperative Alliance. And so I welcome to the podium, and another 6 minutes, this time from the con side, Garry Cronan.
Thank you for that. Firstly, I'm going to read this. It's unusual for me to do that, but there are a lot of points I want to get across. So I'll get gradually faster, I think, as I see this clock ticking down. So my starting point is, as was said, somebody who's devoted over 40 years of their working life to the cooperative cause in one form or another. I'm obviously a true believer. On the question before us, my position could be summarised as yes, I largely believe that cooperatives can build a better future, but, it's an important but. So my following comments could therefore best be summarised as know thyself. And by this, I mean, by all means, be celebratory about the second international year of cooperatives and what they can offer Australia. But make sure the claims for the future are based on a realistic, honest assessment of cooperatives in Australia and globally. My recent research on the role, distribution and survivability of the largest cooperatives and mutuals globally, the top 300 by revenue, that was what I focused on. It was supplemented by examining whether these global trends that I identified also applied at a national level. So my evidence from that global study is to try and inform our understanding for Australia. So firstly, the global trends. To be a viable alternative to other forms of business and make a significant contribution to solving the economic, social, political, environmental problems, any business or movement needs to be able to scale and survive over the long run. Cooperatives and mutuals seem to scale organically in the following industry sectors: agriculture, insurance, banking, wholesale and retail. The first two, agricultural and insurance, represent about 70% of the combined top 300 revenue, and the other two sectors added together to that make 95% of the total revenue. So those four industry sectors are critical. Among the 28 countries in the 300 listing, 5, France, the USA, Germany, Japan and the Netherlands, account for 72% of the top 300 revenue. The next 13 countries, which include strong cooperative countries like Italy, Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, Sweden, New Zealand, account for 25% of the total. And the bottom 10 countries, including Australia, comprise only 2.6% of the total global revenue. The top 300 are important because my research shows they represent around about 46% of the revenue of the total global movement of over 3 million cooperatives. So in other words, basically 300 co-ops represent not far off 50% of the revenue of the 3 million cooperatives. So they're very concentrated. Most large co-ops start off small. We heard a bit of that this morning. The co-op model is a slow growth model and one which takes many generations to develop. It needs time and it needs patience. The larger the co-op is, the older, on average, it is. That's quite important. The average age of the top 300 is 92 years. They're the living history of the movement, containing the DNA of numerous generations. Mergers are an almost universal trend. Cooperatives seem likely to be formed and be larger and survive in a denser cooperative environment. The analogy I use is a forest of old, new and middle growth, whereas in the Australian case, it's often 1 or 2 trees in a paddock, which is the case with some co-ops. Larger co-ops, however, are not any less co-op. Some of the larger ones best display the values. So what about Australia? Australia is an outlier in this context. Its global GDP economy ranks 13th largest in the world, nominal. It is much higher than its top 300 ranking, which is 22nd. In other words, it is not one of the most cooperative countries in the world. This is in spite of some very interesting and innovative cooperatives. Government support and regulation of cooperatives and mutuals has waxed and waned. Neoliberalism has had an effect. The history of the national movement, the national apex structures, has been very checkered in Australia, although one needs to say that it's probably at its strongest at the moment. So my main message today is not that we can't celebrate and have a good future, but make sure it's based on a good understanding of what's gone past. Thank you.
And let that be a lesson to all of those in the timing. Well done, Garry.
I cut out 5 points.
There are no questions, unfortunately, but I'm sure we can sneak them back in the final session, Garry. How about that? Our next speaker, this time for the Pro Group, is Nasteha Mohamud. Is a community development leader with the experience across the not-for-profit public service and local government. She serves as the chairperson of the United Housing Cooperative and holds governance roles across multiple organisations driving strategic impact and growth. Welcome to the podium, Nasteha.
So you've heard about the history of cooperatives all this morning, but also Greg really did us proud earlier. But today I'll talk to you about the people. Australia is facing real challenges: rising costs of living, housing insecurity, and a growing mental health challenge. More and more people are feeling disconnected, powerless, and at the mercy of systems that don't serve them. Depression and anxiety are on the rise, exacerbated by a modern world that often prioritizes individualism over community. But cooperatives offer something different, something deeply needed today. They are built on community, shared purpose, and real impact. Unlike corporations that prioritize profit or government programs that sometimes can feel distant, cooperatives bring people together in a way that is personal and meaningful. They create connection at a time when so many people are feeling alone. They give people ownership over their lives, their work, and their homes, rather than leaving them dependent on systems where they have little say. And when people feel a sense of purpose and belonging, they don't just survive, but they thrive. This is what makes cooperatives so powerful. They are not just about economic benefits or providing services, they're about empowerment. They equip members with skills, training, and leadership opportunities that help them grow both personally and professionally. In a cooperative, members aren't just customers, employees, or tenants. They're active participants, decision makers, and contributors. They share responsibilities, they support one another, and together they succeed. Housing cooperatives are a perfect example of this in action. At a time when home ownership feels unattainable, particularly for young people, for many Australians, and renting often means insecurity and disconnection, housing cooperatives offer an alternative. Unlike government housing, where tenants feel like they have no control over their homes, housing cooperative members experience a sense of ownership, not just over their homes, but over their community and the lives that they build together. In this environment of housing crisis, it provides security and affordability. They also aren't just living side by side, but they are looking out for one another and making decisions together, and creating a place where people feel safe, valued, and at home. They also provide training, upskilling, and career development opportunities for residents who might not have that access to that otherwise. This is something money can't buy. This is exactly what Australia needs today. A country isn't just its economy, its policies, or its institutions. A country is its people, and people need more than just wages, services, or a roof over their head. They need connection, purpose, and a sense of belonging. Cooperatives provide all of us that. They replace isolation with community, they replace disempowerment with agency, and they replace passivity with skills, knowledge, and real participation. So the question isn't whether cooperatives can build a better future for Australia today, it's how quickly can we expand them to make them support the growing needs of our society. Because the more we embrace them, the stronger, more connected, and more resilient our country will be. The answer isn't just yes. It's that cooperatives already are doing this, and now it's time to scale them up. Thank you.
Do you mind resetting the clock? Thank you very much, Nasteha. The point being that you can say a lot in a little time, and we have a fine example. The other fine example is Nasteha, of course, should have potentially been in our Youth Ambassador program, and what an inspiration for us all to be thinking in terms of the governance roles for many of our organisations. So thank you so much for your contribution today. Our next speaker, this time, of course, from the Contrary team, will be Anthony Esposito. And I don't actually have any additional notes for Anthony, which is probably lucky, but I do know that he's been involved in the sector for an enormous amount of time. The example being is that when we did some Zoom meetings about this, whatever, Garry and Anthony just went on. They'd known each other since Mulaney, so, beat that. So, Anthony, please come to the podium and let the clock begin.
Thanks, Peter. I did send you my bio, but well, my my starting proposition for the question, can cooperatives build a better Australia today, is maybe, but only if. And that's only if we define what makes a better Australia. The proposition's just hanging out there. What is the reform agenda? By definition, making something better is to reform it. What is the reform agenda that will make Australia better? And also, only if we define the reach, impacts and limits of co-ops. The historical record is a noble one, without a doubt. The flowering of the Commonwealth owed much to the notions of mutuality and cooperation, but it was confined to the white Australians of the time. The movement in many ways gave rise to social security, to the welfare state, to social democracy across the country. But there's a democratic deficit in the country today, as there is in the world. So where is the co-op movement in that? In terms of Garry's figures, contrary to the rest of the world, Australian cooperatives are somewhat in decline. Numerically, we're not significant in terms of the numbers when it comes to the millions of organised forms of conducting business in society. So there's a question of whether we can actually build and grow and sustain the movement and turn it into some sort of powerful impetus for change, for reform in Australia. And that's to note that the principles are the shining light. Yes, in principle, co-ops do make a better Australia. Wherever they've existed, they've made a situation better. But we're talking, when we say Australia, about a country, about a nation, about a democracy, and all of the things that combined give us challenges for the future. So I would say, principles aside, no. We're not making Australia better. We are weak in our larger purpose, which is reflected in cooperation between cooperatives. There's insufficient organised cooperation at a scale that would actually make an impact on the country. And to such a degree that we're not actually fully engaged in the great reform tasks of the 21st century. We're not operating in isolation. We're operating against a series of very serious background issues in which our cooperation is merely the starting point. So I would say co-ops lack a movement consciousness. People talk about the cooperative movement. What is it? How many of the millions of people who are notionally members of co-ops know they are? Act in a concerted way according to the principles. And we lack the ability to deliver a collective political program to implement fundamental reform to make the country better. So carving out a niche and allowing pockets of goodness is, regional scale or local scale, these are all fantastic, but it's barely an increase on the way that most decent people live within their families and communities. Mutuality, cooperation, solidarity and trust are requisite to a functioning society. So we're just part of the building blocks of, civil society, really. We're doing the good stuff, and we've got a particular way of doing the good stuff. But co-ops standing alone and in loose alignment are not capable of transformative, critical or strategic action. Theory of cooperation is one thing. Actual strategic cooperative action geared towards change is entirely another. So without this, a better Australia, a cooperative Australia, may well be the nourishing dream of the true believers, and I'm one of those. While the reality is that the fundamental challenges of our time are being dictated by far more powerful and hostile forces and interests. These forces don't deliver to our principles and values, they actively oppose them or work to defeat them. They are in fact eroding our tenuous grasp on the basics of democracy and social justice. And there's a full and uncontrolled assault grounded in 500 years of imperial, colonial and capitalist logics from which the original resistance of First Nations, traditional communities and dislocated peoples emerged. That is, our collective solidarities that gave expression in the face of waves of disruption and gave rise to co-ops, mutuals, friendlies, unions and the like, and for First Nations people to new Indigenous forms of governance and self-determination movements. So the thread that connects these movements is human rights, and we're far from a cooperative or any ideals in this space. So it's not a question, it's a challenge. Can cooperatives build a better Australia, or at least play a constructive and powerful role in the change movements and intergenerational tasks of the 21st century? The answer is whether there is a cooperative movement that is no longer in retreat, that is able to marshal ideas and arguments that build participation in a world after capitalism, and there will be that world, that is in its basics cooperative and mutualist, and in its highest degree capable of resolving the major issues: a foundational compact between First Nations and the Second Nation, the lack of sustainability in the climate and biodiversity crisis, and the inequitable distribution of collectively produced wealth. Fortunately, there are people engaged in this task in all walks of life. We're in this room, joined through the dense connections of solidarity and spiritual values, and the power to nurture the forest is still in our hands.
Thank you. And I think there's some really interesting points in regard to the movement and how you may enact some of that. So the next speaker from the Pro team has got plenty of experience, particularly in Parliament, and hopefully he'll reflect on that. So Mick Veitch was elected to the New South Wales Legislative Council in 2007 and served for 16 years. Included the Deputy Government Whip, a Parliamentary Secretary, and served as a Shadow Minister holding a portfolio and responsibility for trade and investment, industry, water, primary industries and regional New South Wales. And of course that includes co-ops. So Mick's now a government relations consultant with one of Australia's leading government relations firms, Council House. Mick, please come to the podium.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Can I just say, just an observation very quickly? The speeches have been delivered by a range of different mechanisms. Prepared speeches, we've had people reading from their phones a speech, and we've also had Greg doing what he always does, delivering with gusto. Can co-ops build a better Australia today? Well, yes, you can. You can. But let me tell you, you're doing it in an economy that's built around the me, myself and I society. We're doing it where everyone's considered to be an independent economic unit. That's the current state of play in Australia. But you can make Australia a better place today. And I'll give you an example, and I draw upon Killarney. I have a very similar scenario. I come from a little country town called Adelong, and I know there's some people in the room that know that because we were talking about Adelong a bit earlier. Adelong's a population of about 1,000 people. Me, myself and I society. Everyone goes about doing their job, they're doing what they're going to do, things are going well. 2019, 2020, they were almost burnt off the map. Almost burnt off the map. They're not the only community to have suffered that fate at that time. Cobargo comes to mind as well. What happened? Well, the economic impact of the fires for the community of Tumut, the Shire of Tumut, which was predominantly a softwood economy. 40% of the softwood trees were burnt. 600 people lost their jobs, and it was essentially to the local economy an $800 million a year hit every year for the next 20 years. Me, myself and I society. How do you survive in that? So what happened in Adelong, a group of people got together, and I know Greg will shudder when I say this, but they set up an incorporated association, and they now essentially drive the local main street. They have the post office. They got Bendigo Bank to come in because the bank left town. They very recently looked closely at taking over the only pub in town, which was about to close. But I think fortunately they didn't do that. Someone else stepped in. Me, myself and I society, opportunity, opportunity comes when things fall, fail or break down in those societies. And I want to talk about climate change, natural disaster and the role of co-ops. We just had floods in the far north coast. It's the same scenario. Out of that, what is the leadership role that co-ops will play in a me, myself and I society today and going forward? You have a leadership role. You have there's a purpose around collectivism within those communities, communityism. Our First Nations people have been big advocates of communityism. This is the place, this is the space today for co-ops and going forward. You can reactivate the co-op model off the back of the need of society to rebuild itself, whether it be the social infrastructure, the physical infrastructure. It's about what opportunities will arise in the immediacy of that natural disaster. What are the opportunities? What are the needs of your community at that point in time? Animal welfare. People forget about, in a natural disaster, they worry about humans, forget about the animals. For the humans, where do we go? What do we do? For the humans supporting the rest of society, whether it be the medical profession, the vets, what's the role for co-ops in that? And then there's the rebuild. There's the immediate rebuild and the longer term rebuild. Housing, pods. What's the scenario there for co-ops? Have we thought through what co-ops can do to respond to natural disasters going forward? Now, folks, there will be more of them. We all know that. That's the society we live in. That's the climate we live in. And for my mind, co-op, as someone who advocated for more than 16 years, but certainly for 16 years in Macquarie Street, New South Wales, for the cooperative model extensively. In fact, helped set up the Parliamentary Friends of Co-ops wherever Sam is. We did that as one of the legacies of my time in the Parliament. What do you need, not just for today, but to go forward? Like, what will the cooperative model look like in 10 years' time and in 15 years' time? Because, folks, you have a very definite role in the growth of the Australian economy, but right down to the granular level of communities. Communities like Killarney, communities like Adelong, communities like Cobargo in regional New South Wales. You have a role. And that role is around government. What's your advocacy to government? What do you need government to do to assist you? But I want to reverse that. I want you to think about this. What can co-ops do to assist government? If you change the question, you turn it around, you'll change the conversation. And I think one of the great things that you do at the moment is you engage with parliamentarians. But every 4 years, there's a new cohort. I'm one of the ones that missed out in 23, so I understand how the change happens. Did you engage with the new MPs? Do they know what a co-op is? Do they know which co-ops are in their electorate? Have you invited them out? Today, you are building a great Australia today, but you need to do it in conjunction with the parliamentarians who will pull the legislative levers to finance co-ops, to support co-ops, to build co-ops. Folks, you are doing a great job. You can do a lot more.
I'm thinking of a new idea for the vote, actually. I was thinking of dividing the House each way, and then we could work that out. And I think ring bells, and I think Mick could understand that process. So well done, thank you, Mick. Our final speaker in the group sessions, the last of the contrary speakers, will be Rebel Black, a human agronomist and syntropic entrepreneur. That's a beauty, isn't it? Empowers rural women to create impactful enterprises in rural, regional and remote Australia. She's founder of the Rural Women's Collection and has driven more than $50 million in funding for multiple community-based infrastructure initiatives and business development. So, Rebel, please come to the podium.
It's my great honour to be here today, Yama. I live on Uwallerai country in Lightning Ridge, Western New South Wales, and I want to draw your attention to the forest that's growing outside these walls. 5 years ago, we were at the tail end of the worst drought that our country had seen in living memory. And I was at a conference and I met a man. I asked him what he did, and he said he taught people to plant water. And I said, well, you better come to Lightning Ridge because it hasn't rained in 7 years. And the answer to drought in our country is to pull more trees over so that farmers can grow more crops in the times where it does rain. So together we grew a forest in semi-arid Australia. And what that forest has taught me, and why it's relevant for the conversation today, is that change takes time, that working together is particularly challenging, and that perhaps in Australia, to respond to the question, can co-ops build a better Australia today, we really need to take a long, hard look at ourselves. And if we look outside at this forest, we need to be reminded that we are nature, that we are part of nature, that we're not separate from it, and that people have a role to play in that ecosystem. And people are both our greatest asset, as we know in the co-op sector, and they're also our greatest challenge. The three reasons why I think that we, and my colleagues and I think that co-ops can build a better Australia today, but, and if we are able to harness the collective wisdom of the people and move them together. And that's one of the greatest challenges. We've heard it in the questions today, we've heard it from some of our previous speakers. It's harder to work together quickly. And if we need an immediate outcome today, the co-op movement still has plenty of work to do. Really, in terms of the forest analogy, we are like the little saplings growing. We're still growing and finding our way in the trees in holes, or the trees in the paddock analogy. Co-ops are harder to manage than traditional businesses because we are democratic. It's our greatest strength, and it's also one of our potential weaknesses. Decision-making timelines are typically longer because they prioritise member consensus. In Australia, some co-ops have struggled with strategic agility because the collective decision-making can slow their ability to respond in crisis. We've seen where communities will catalyse and come together in crisis, and because of the lack of education and understanding in the co-op sector, they very often default to other operating models, the social enterprise model, the incorporated association model. They're not, co-ops not front of mind at those times. We also understand that while the lone entrepreneur can move like a wildfire, co-ops grow like deep-rooted trees, strong but slow. And slow growth means that while the forest might be mighty in time, it does not yet provide the shade that Australia might truly need today. The ecosystem isn't ready. One of the things that I've been learning as I've grown a forest in semi-arid Australia is that you need both quality and quantity of life. And we need to improve the soil. In order to improve the soil, you have to use life, you have to grow things. In fact, in order to plant water, you need plants. Australia's broader business and financial ecosystem does not yet support cooperatives in the way that it could, and it's limiting our ability to grow at scale. Co-ops are not well understood in business schools, government policy, or in the general public. In fact, the BCCM did a report in 21 that found only 3% of Australians could name a co-op that they actually even engaged with. NRMA, credit unions, even our big co-ops like CBH Group. Unlike corporations, we struggle to attract venture capital. And with 0.2% of Australian business investment going into co-ops, there's a massive gap. A forest cannot thrive in a soil that is barren. So without investment in awareness, education and policy reform, co-ops will remain struggling saplings or trees in holes unless something is done to change that. Change is slow and our challenge is time. Co-ops are definitely a long-term solution. I'm a big fan. I've started one and I'm about to start a second. But unless we prioritise sustainability over quick profit, it's our strength, but it's also our constraint. The risk is that the co-op movement in Australia will celebrate its success and not reflect critically on what is still lacking both in our ecosystem and in our opportunities. So we must evolve faster if we want to be a viable alternative to traditional capitalism and play a role in the end of capitalism as we know it. We cannot simply admire the saplings. We must actively cultivate the soil and prune what's not working to ensure the conditions are real for widespread growth. I think co-ops in Australia hold immense potential to again flourish, but they're not yet ready to build a better Australia at scale. The seeds need nourishing, the ecosystem needs to mature, and the movement must look inward with humility to ensure that its readiness for the challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rebel. It was inspiring, actually. Now we move to the second part of a classic debate. In a normal sense, it would be a rebuttal. Of course, we're not going to do that. We're going to reflect. But what we are going to do is ask the pro team to reflect first. That'll be 3 2-minute quick chats about the information they've learnt from the contrary team, and the same will occur on the second. We'll move into that quickly. So if I've got the microphone ready for the pro team, why don't we start with whichever way you.
Can you? Yep, excellent. I always get these things wrong. What you've heard from the contraire is actually thought-provoking. It actually provides a platform. You can draw upon this for a constructive reflection about where you are at now. And we can talk, and the question is about today. But the reflection from the contraire, and all very good contributions, by the way, what it can do is provide you the platform for going forward. Your advocacy program, your development program, the program that you want to take to members of parliament to agitate for the support that you require, or the legislative framework that you require. It's provides you with an opportunity to, shape your own co-ops. And I'm quite impressed that Rebel's setting up a second one. That's impressive. You can look at setting up your own going forward. I think the one thing that you've heard from everyone today is this is a model that's not going away, but it is a model that can be fine-tuned, contemporised, or whatever in the current status of Australia. I've looked at co-ops in Canada, and folks, there's a co-op for everything in Canada. And it's the go-to response for a problem in Canada. They don't say, we've got a problem, let's go to the government and see if they can fix it. They use the cooperative model as the first port of call, and it's only then, if that doesn't work, they go to government. Having said that, their government also funds heavily the cooperative movement, which is a part of the agitation. Can I just say, it's hard to rebut a lot of the stuff that you agree with. And on that basis, whilst I'm rebutting, I'm actually agreeing with a fair bit of what was said.
Yes, I have similar difficulties. I actually was applauding my supposed opponents. So it's actually very difficult. And, the heartfelt thought about how we are a movement. We are people who care about issues, social issues, Indigenous communities, environmental issues, and also we have a strong, firm belief in economic democracy. I suppose to add to the point about where do we go, I totally agree that we have to sort of get our politicians engaged. One of the things that sort of worried me is the damage that neoliberal rubbish did to us. And not only to us, and I'll say it to the trade union movement as well, and other collective-based organisations in this country. And the politicians have to get out of this mindset of endless belief in markets I was told, for example, that by one very senior public servant in New South Wales, that there was this view by both the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, I don't know if this is correct, that for every new regulation you had to bore in, you had to get rid of 2. This sort of thinking. And, this is why I think we lost the registered clubs. As Sam and I have talked about why the option of registering for a co-op is no longer there. But that's an important issue. We've got to start regaining and re-challenging those beliefs among our politicians particularly. The second thing I think that's important in reflection is the point that we were both making about banks. We have a mutual banking sector and credit unions. And one of the sad things, I suppose, in reflecting on Australian history is they were almost separate. They were paralleling the rest of the cooperative movement, and that something's got to be done about that relationship. All I'll say finally is we did have a very interesting policy between 1995 and 2000. It was called the Credit Care Movement, where federal governments got the mutual banks and the credit unions to set up branches in communities that have lost their banking facilities. So we've done it before.
Thank you. And yes, I also was agreeing with a lot of what was being said. And for me, I am learning every day about cooperatives. I don't know a lot about the history because I didn't live through it. So it's great to understand where we've come from and then to think about where we're going. And some of the comments that were made were harnessing collective wisdom about how slow we might be as a sector, and also thinking about the future. There's 2 cohorts that I wanted to call out. You all know that young people want to be participating in for-purpose initiatives. They want to be making a difference in community, and they want to be involved in their community and be a part of our future together. And we struggle a lot of the time to have a say or get a seat on the table. And I think it's, that's a great opportunity. There's a great opportunity there with young people to be involved in this, to help us make this our sector move a little bit faster. Everybody, a lot of young people are very educated and are very interested to learn more and see how they can contribute to their community. So I think that's something that we should really put a lot of focus on. And the other thing that came to mind was we have a lot of new Australians, migrant communities who are building a better life here in Australia. A lot of people that are running very successful businesses that want to invest in their community and be part of movements that make a better future, not only for themselves, but for their children and the future of their kids, particularly in a country where they're starting over from scratch. So I think there are opportunities for us to leverage with those 2 cohorts, especially to help move our sector a little bit faster.
And we'll now move to the contrary. And let's just start at this end. Because that was exactly the way we were going. Oh, Rebel, you were going to go next. Yeah. Rebel, then you.
Thank you. It's nice to be agreed with, I guess. Like we said at the beginning, we're all here to move the movement forward, so it's hard to be contrary. And I guess when I think about the forest, you think about what nutrients are required in order for the forest to grow. Soil first, nutrients from the external world, and then actually largely the ecosystem will look after itself if you get it right. And I think what our colleagues are speaking to is where looking at where the deficits in those nutrients might lie. So what are we doing in order to cultivate a better soil? We're operating, I think, Mick spoke about the, what did you call it? The independent economic unit. We live in a society that perpetuates that separation, that we are an independent economic unit, and that we're in an instant gratification cycle, I think, which also is part of the challenge of the soil that we are living in, which is really the broader ecosystem, government policy, community, and the mindset of the people. The mindset's crucial, and if you think about some of our earlier speakers as well, they spoke about intergenerational transfer, that it was just assumed that people would be part of co-ops because their parents and grandparents did. That's changing. Our current generations are not built that way. The volunteering sector is going to struggle. Co-ops are largely reliant on volunteers. We have to take a new approach. We've got to look at the soil and how we're improving it. We've got to maximise and optimise the nutrients that we have got access to. The people are that, the policies are that, and then we have to optimise those opportunities. And then we've got to make sure that we've got enough plants planted in the ecosystem, which is co-ops, in order for the ecosystem to become self-perpetuating. It's an issue of scale.
You can hear me? Yes. Look, I think the commonality is we're all concerned for people. We're all driven by some sort of notion of people power through cooperation, and I think that's fundamental. My concerns are that it's not sufficient to merely have people addressing needs through mutuality and cooperation and creating some circumstances in which those needs are met in the face of the challenges that we actually confront. So that the question of reform is actually a radical one in this time. It's a question of real deep transformation, and how we bring that about. I mean, it's a broader political problem. The society at large is grappling with this, and we don't have many or any of the answers. Seriously, we're sort of locked into institutional arrangements that are not amenable to change. We've got economic power vested way outside of the hands of people. We've got governments constrained by international forces, so our national domestic democracy is hostage to much larger, greater and hostile forces. So for people to combat this, we don't merely need the existence of cooperatives, or even in that sense merely a cooperative movement, although building a more robust, united and integrated movement would be great. We actually need a cooperative political platform that allows us to bring about social and political and cultural change in the order as it is required today, which is a kind of contradiction of timing. We need time to grow the forest at the same time as there's a full frontal assault on cutting down the forest. Right, and so we've got different kinds of front lines, and it's always been a dilemma for cooperation and cooperatives of, modelling the alternative, but actually engaging in the radical social change that's needed to bring about a better world.
Yes. One of the points I'd make is that we were given the job of being critical, if you like, the sort of tough love, if you like, approach to the cooperative movement. I think people need to accept within the wider co-op movement that being critical is not necessarily being less supportive. In fact, self-awareness builds confidence once you understand it. Denial is the problem. If you don't understand exactly what's working or what hasn't worked, then where real need is. So being critical is part of the process of awareness and being reflective. The other thing I'd say is that every individual person sitting in this room who's part of a cooperative is part of a movement which dates back well over 150, 200 years. It's survived because it is relevant. That's what we can celebrate, the movement itself. The individual co-op you're part of does the bonding at a local level across particular needs. The movement itself does the bridging. It brings a lot of different people together around a common set of values, and that's basically the strength of co-ops compared to other forms of social business. It's business with a social purpose in a social movement with a long history, a long legacy, and you get to self-define what it is to be a cooperative. That's quite a privilege. There's solidarity there, there's unity there. Celebrate the movement as well as your own, and build the movement as well as your own individual co-op.
Look, one of the great benefits of being both the adjudicator in this debate and playing a curatorial role in the Assembly is that I can change the question. And so I'm going to change the question from being a question to a statement. And I believe from what we've just heard that we can build a better Australia with cooperatives. So I'd like you to stand and join with me and thank Greg Patmore, Nasteha Mohamud, Mick Veitch, Rebel Black, Garry Cronan and Anthony Esposito. Thank you. I think we all know that cooperatives are the winner, and that's the point of this debate. So here. Before we go to lunch, there is one more item that we're going to work on. Thank you to our debaters. I'm now just simply going to engage in a short promotion. It's a 2-day program, of course, and therefore there are some workshops tomorrow. Now, the workshops and, of course, the focus for tomorrow is about cooperative sectors, about how you engage with your own sector and maybe some others. And so what we want to be able to do is that some of those workshops that will be occurring tomorrow are not sector-based. So therefore, I just wanted to invite the 3 key ones involved in that just to the stage for 1 minute, just to sort of promote their activity and for their workshop, and then, of course, lunch. So first up, I would like to invite Wicked Elephants to come up and Cerise, if you'd make some comments, please. Ta-da! The first dancer.
G'day everybody. Democratic member control, how well do we do it? Imagine being invited into a situation where there were 10, 11 member co-ops, all at various stages of fractiousness, of fragmentation, trying to collectively and in a participatory way, define a strategic plan. Well, the CEO was brave enough to invite us in, and we got people together across all of those different co-ops. We had over 30 people in the room, plus the board, plus the administrative staff, and together in one day we generated pillars for a strategic plan. The second day we came together, there was no disagreement whatsoever, just buy-in and how do we accelerate and do this. So we're offering a session on collaborative strategic planning tomorrow. How do we really do democratic member control? How do we really bring about participation with a broader range of stakeholders? How do we move planning beyond our boards? You've got to get creative. It's moving away from talk into being creative, and that's what we, Wicked Elephants, do.
Sorry for the duck noise. I just couldn't help it. Well done. Of course, Wicked Elephants will be doing their presentation tomorrow. Oh, shut up. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. is one of the workshops over in the Heritage. In the Heritage Room at the Teachers Federation. Second, cab off the rank. That's a great comment for all the cooperative cabs. Perker Lab, again, shared leadership on cooperatives tomorrow. Mel Gelch, if you could come forward, please.
You may notice if you have a look at our profile on the website, there's not one person, there's a group of us. So,
Sorry, comrades.
Our question for our workshop tomorrow is how can we shift from power over in our cooperatives to power among? And that's deliberately provocative. And it's because we know we're doing some awesome work, and where can we shift how we are working together in order to engage younger people, to engage migrant communities, to build the movement. So we're inviting people to bring your shared leadership practices. We'll bring some of ours too. So this is a really practical workshop to have a little, if you're kind of after lunch on Friday, you're ready to take some action, come and learn some practices from us about how you can do this, not so slowly actually. It doesn't have to be like that. So come and join us after lunch tomorrow. Oh, we're Percolab Co-op. We're a living lab for the future of work.
And they beat the duck. That was... of course, their presentation tomorrow will be at... Percolab is just after lunch, as I recall. Day 2, where are we? Oh, God, who's got that? Oh, here we go. Yes, workshops that'll, in fact, at 2 p.m. in the Heritage Room again. You'll enjoy the Heritage Room. That is the room we're actually having the drinks in, the network drinks tonight. Part of the reason, of course, that from moving from here to the Teachers Federation is so you know where the place is. But the Heritage Room as well will be having our drinks. They'll be entertained through members of the Lane-Combe Co-operative, and also the Estonian community will be doing some of the catering. You'll find more about that as we go. And in fact, we'll be having some entertainment shortly, which will be presented by the Cooperative Orchestra. But please, you'll be getting your lunch. But before we do that, one more speaker, and that's from the Rosaria Co-op team in terms of their arts workshop. So please, Bettina Kaiser, please.
That's a hard gig just before lunch. No, I'm just quick doing a call out for, so we are the Risaria. It's like pizzeria with an R, because we run a risograph printer as a shared resource for creatives in Sydney and any community projects. And initially we were going to be one of the sector roundtables tomorrow at 2. The arts roundtable, and we were going to run that with other arts co-ops, but I think there's only 2 others here, which hopefully we meet soon. So we've decided together with the Co-op Fed that we are going to make a little zine workshop for anybody here who wants to come and check out what we are doing and maybe use that as like making little magazines that we print a lot in our workshop. That you could use for onboarding members, for example, for the co-op values. What else did we write down? Co-op principles, or onboarding new people. You can make little magazines that look like this, very easy to set up, you can print them with us or in a different way. But you don't need a creative bone. Just come play with us tomorrow at 2. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's time for us to break for lunch. Please again thank all those that were involved in the debating group. We reconvene here at, is it 2:30? Can I get a nod? Oh, sorry, 2 o'clock? 1:15. So move quick. Thank you, everybody.